With a cold smile on his face, he kissed his pregnant mistress right in front of his wife, on her own birthday, and humiliated her by saying she was too old. But when the music stopped, he fainted at what his betrayed wife revealed in front of everyone. The crystal chandelier cast a warm glow over the ballroom of the Richardson estate, illuminating the meticulously arranged silver and blue decorations, Evelyn's favorite colors. The mansion on Mercer Island stood as a monument to success, its windows reflecting like jewels across Lake Washington. Inside, Seattle's elite mingled with practiced ease, champagne flutes tinkling against the backdrop of a string quartet playing softly in the corner. "Happy birthday, darling." A silver-haired woman in her 70s embraced Evelyn Richardson, her perfume slightly too strong. "60 looks magnificent on you." Evelyn smiled graciously, smoothing down her midnight blue dress. The silk felt cool against her skin, a sharp contrast to the heat rising in her chest. "Thank you, Margaret. I'm so glad you could come." As Margaret moved on to greet other guests, Evelyn's eyes drifted across the room to where her husband stood. Harrison Richardson commanded attention without effort, his tall frame and silver-streaked dark hair giving him the distinguished look of a man who had earned every penny of his considerable fortune. He laughed at something the mayor said, clapping him on the shoulder with the practiced camaraderie that had helped him build Richardson Properties from nothing into one of Seattle's most powerful real estate empires. 35 years of marriage had taught Evelyn to read the subtle signals most people missed. The way Harrison's eyes crinkled when his smile was genuine, the slight tension in his shoulders when he was calculating his next move. Tonight, she noticed how his gaze repeatedly strayed across the room, drawn like a magnet to a young woman in a tasteful emerald dress that couldn't quite disguise her 6-month pregnancy. Laurel Davis, executive assistant, 29 years old, beautiful in that effortless way that made other women simultaneously envious and insecure. "Mum," Rebecca appeared at Evelyn's side, offering a fresh glass of champagne. At 30, Rebecca was the perfect blend of her parents, Harrison's sharp features softened by Evelyn's warmth. "You look like you could use this." "Just taking it all in," Evelyn replied, accepting the glass with a grateful smile. "Your father certainly knows how to throw a party." Rebecca followed her mother's gaze. "Dad invited her. On your birthday." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "That's low, even for him." "Professional courtesy," Evelyn said mildly, though the words tasted bitter. "The entire executive team is here." "Mom," Rebecca began, her expression a mixture of concern and frustration. "You don't have to." "Let's not discuss it now," Evelyn interjected gently. "Tonight is a celebration." Rebecca squeezed her mother's hand before being pulled away by an old family friend, leaving Evelyn alone once more. She took a small sip of champagne, allowing herself to remember another lifetime. Lecture halls filled with eager students, her office lined with dog-eared classics, the satisfaction of leading young minds through the labyrinths of literature. Professor Evelyn Wright had been respected, accomplished, on track for department chair. Then Harrison Richardson had walked into that faculty fundraiser, and the trajectory of her life had changed forever. She'd been 35 then, already established in her career. He'd been 38, hungry and ambitious, with plans that required a certain type of wife, a sophisticated hostess, a charming companion, a woman who would elevate his social standing while providing unwavering support. Evelyn had become all those things, believing the sacrifice worthwhile for the love they shared. "Mrs. Richardson," a deep voice pulled her from her thoughts. Marcus Tanner, Harrison's oldest business partner, stood before her with a warm smile. "The party is magnificent. You've outdone yourself." "Marcus," she smiled genuinely, "I'm so glad you could make it. How's Claire?" "Recovering well from her hip replacement. She sends her love and regrets." Evelyn nodded sympathetically. "Please give her my best. I'll send over some of those lavender scones she loves." Marcus lowered his voice. "I hope you don't mind me saying, Evelyn, but you seem different tonight. Everything all right?" "Change is in the air, Marcus," she replied cryptically. "But tonight is for celebrating, isn't it?" Across the room, Harrison was now standing uncomfortably close to Laurel, his hand briefly touching the small of her back in a gesture too intimate to be merely professional. Evelyn watched as Laurel laughed at something he said, her hand unconsciously cradling her pregnant belly. The sight didn't hurt as much as it should have. Perhaps she had known for longer than she cared to admit. The late nights at the office, the sudden business trips, the way he no longer sought her company in the evenings, preferring instead to lock himself in his study with a glass of whiskey and urgent paperwork. "Ladies and gentlemen," the event coordinator's voice rose above the chatter, "if I could have your attention, please. It's time for the special dance between our birthday celebrant and her husband." A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd as the string quartet transitioned into the opening notes of "The Way You Look Tonight," their song since Harrison had first taken her hand at that faculty fundraiser decades ago. Evelyn felt the weight of expectation as guests formed a circle around the dance floor. For a moment, Harrison stood perfectly still, his eyes moving from Evelyn to Laurel and back again. Something shifted in his expression, a hardening, a decision made. Instead of walking toward his wife, Harrison moved in the opposite direction. The room grew quieter as confusion spread. He stopped in front of Laurel, extending his hand with a confident smile. "Harrison?" Evelyn's voice barely carried across the sudden silence. He turned, glass in hand, his expression a curious mixture of defiance and relief, like a man finally unburdened of a heavy secret. "I think," he said, his voice carrying easily in the hushed room, "it's time everyone knew the truth." The quartet faltered, the violin sustaining an awkward note before fading to nothing. Harrison placed his arm around Laurel's waist, pulling her close. "This remarkable woman has given me something I never thought I'd have again. A future. A new family." He looked directly at Evelyn now, something almost cruel flickering in his eyes. "I'm going to be a father again at 62. Isn't that something?" The room had gone deathly still. Hundreds of eyes darted between Harrison's triumphant smile, Laurel's uncertain expression, and Evelyn's perfectly composed face. "Evelyn has been a wonderful wife," Harrison continued, his voice taking on a performative gentleness that made several guests shift uncomfortably. "But we've grown in different directions. She settled into maturity." The slight pause before the word made its true meaning clear. "While I've discovered I still have so much living to do." Rebecca pushed through the crowd, her face flushed with anger. "Dad, stop it right now." Harrison ignored her. "I wasn't planning to do this tonight, but seeing Evelyn turn 60 made me realize life is short, too short to live a lie." He raised his glass. "To new beginnings." No one joined the toast. Evelyn stood perfectly still, her champagne glass held loosely in one hand. The silence stretched for what felt like minutes, but was likely only seconds. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady. "Thank you for that clarification, Harrison." She set her glass down on a nearby table with deliberate care. "I appreciate your honesty, belated though it may be." Something in her calm response seemed to unsettle Harrison. He had clearly expected tears, anger, perhaps even a scene. Instead, he faced the dignified poise of a woman who appeared unsurprised. "I've known about your affair for months," she continued, her voice carrying clearly. "Though I admit I didn't expect you to announce it at my birthday celebration. That shows a certain creativity I didn't think you possessed." A few nervous laughs broke the tension, quickly stifled. Evelyn moved toward the musicians, her midnight blue dress shimmering under the chandeliers. "Since my husband has chosen to share his news, I believe I'm entitled to the same courtesy." Harrison's triumphant expression faltered. "Evelyn, there's no need to—" "Oh, but there is." She smiled, and there was something in that smile that made several guests exchange uneasy glances. It wasn't the smile of a devastated woman. It was the smile of someone who had been waiting patiently for this moment. Evelyn approached the small stage where the quartet sat frozen, uncertain whether to resume playing or remain silent. With graceful steps that belied her 60 years, she ascended and turned to face the crowd. "First, I want to thank all of you for coming tonight." Her voice was clear, measured, the voice she had once used to command lecture halls. "It means a great deal to have friends surrounding me at this significant juncture in my life." Harrison took an uncertain step forward. "Evelyn," she continued, as if he hadn't spoken, "many of you have known us for decades. You've witnessed our success, our social ascent." Her eyes swept the room. "What you haven't seen is what happens behind closed doors, the compromises, the sacrifices, the slow erosion of self that comes from loving someone who views you as an asset rather than a partner." The room had gone so quiet that the distant sound of boats on Lake Washington could be heard through the windows. "Harrison," she said, looking directly at him now, "believes I've been in the dark about his relationship with Laurel. He believes I've been oblivious to his other activities as well." She smiled again, that same unsettling smile. But you see, when you spend 35 years with someone, you learn to observe, to listen, to wait. Marcus Tanner shifted his weight nervously, his eyes darting to Harrison with a question that needed no voicing. 3 years ago, Evelyn continued, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Most of their friends had not known. Harrison had insisted on keeping her illness private. During my treatment, Harrison was the model husband. He attended appointments, held my hand through chemotherapy, promised we would face whatever came together. Her voice softened momentarily before regaining its strength. It was also during this time that he hired Laurel. Harrison's face had lost its color. Laurel looked down at her hands, suddenly conscious of the many eyes upon her. What few people know, Evelyn said, is that my prognosis was initially quite poor. The doctors gave me 5 years, at best. She paused, letting the words sink in. Facing mortality has a way of clarifying one's perspective. I realized I had lived too long in Harrison's shadow, had given up too much of myself. She stepped forward, to the very edge of the stage. So while Harrison believed I was focused solely on my recovery, I was learning about our business, about finance, about the many, many secrets my husband has kept over the years. Harrison's face had transformed from confusion to dawning horror. Evelyn, that's enough. His voice carried a warning that went unheeded. I don't think it is, Harrison. Her tone remained conversational, almost pleasant. Not when I've discovered offshore accounts in Grand Cayman. Not when I've found evidence of bribes to municipal inspectors. Not when I've seen falsified documents for your last 3 major developments. Marcus Tanner's champagne glass slipped from his fingers, shattering on the marble floor. No one moved to clean it up. And certainly not, Evelyn continued, when I've spent the last 6 months legally transferring half of your assets into my name, right under your nose. Harrison laughed, though the sound held no humor. That's impossible. You've never understood business. You're a literature professor, for God's sake. Was? Evelyn corrected gently. But you know what literature professors do exceptionally well, Harrison. We study, and I've had 35 years to study you. She descended from the stage with unhurried grace and walked directly to Laurel, whose face had gone ashen. As for you, my dear, Evelyn said, her voice almost kind, I have news that might interest you. Harrison had a vasectomy 25 years ago, after we decided 1 child was enough. He never wanted more children. She tilted her head, observing the confusion blooming in the younger woman's eyes. So whoever the father of your baby is, it isn't Harrison. Laurel's hand flew to her mouth. That's a lie, she whispered, turning to Harrison. Tell her it's a lie. Harrison stood frozen, caught between 2 devastating revelations, with no path of escape. I confirmed the vasectomy with Dr. Peterson, Evelyn added, her voice now audible to everyone. It's in the medical report I requested as his wife and healthcare proxy. Laurel released Harrison's arm as if it had burned her. The carefully constructed future she had planned crumbled in seconds. Evelyn turned back to her husband of 35 years, the man who had just tried to humiliate her in front of everyone they knew. Harrison, she said, addressing him directly, you thought you could discard me like an object that had lost its value. But I was never merely an accessory in your life, something you clearly never understood. Harrison opened his mouth, but no words came. His face flushed red as he struggled to process everything happening. Suddenly he clutched at his chest and staggered backward. Harrison? Laurel asked, but she was already stepping away from him, instinctively protecting her belly. He fell to his knees, gasping for breath. Marcus rushed to his side while someone called for a doctor. Amidst the chaos, Evelyn remained serene. She knelt beside the man she had loved for more than half her life, her expression a complex mixture of vindication and something like pity. One last thing you should know, she said softly, for his ears alone. My cancer has been in remission for 2 years. The doctors say I'll likely live into my 80s. She leaned closer, her lips almost brushing his ear. More than enough time to rebuild my life and to ensure you never harm another person again. As Harrison was laid gently on the floor, medical professionals pushing through the stunned crowd, Evelyn stood and straightened her midnight blue dress. She looked out at the sea of shocked faces, friends, acquaintances, business associates, all witnesses to the end of one chapter of her life and the beginning of another. And for the first time in years, Evelyn Richardson felt truly, completely free. "Someone call an ambulance!" Marcus shouted, loosening Harrison's tie as the fallen man gasped for air. The party dissolved into controlled chaos, doctors among the guests rushing forward, security personnel clearing space, phones emerging to make emergency calls. Evelyn stood apart from the commotion, a strange calm settling over her. She felt Rebecca's hand slip into hers, squeezing tightly. "Mom, are you okay?" Rebecca's voice trembled slightly. "I'm fine, dear." Evelyn's eyes remained fixed on Harrison as paramedics burst through the double doors. "Better than I've been in years, actually." Rebecca studied her mother's face. "You've been planning this." It wasn't a question, but Evelyn nodded anyway. "Not the heart attack, of course, but the rest? Yes." As the paramedics loaded Harrison onto a stretcher, Laurel hovered uncertainly nearby, one hand protectively cradling her belly. When she caught Evelyn's eye, she quickly looked away, her cheeks flushing with humiliation. "Should we go to the hospital?" Rebecca asked, watching her father being wheeled toward the exit. "You should," Evelyn replied, giving her daughter's hand a gentle squeeze. "He's still your father, and your husband. In name only, as it turns out." Evelyn's smile held no bitterness, only a weary acceptance. "Go, sweetheart. I have some things to take care of here." As Rebecca hurried after the paramedics, Marcus approached, his normally confident demeanor shaken. "Evelyn, what have you done?" "Nothing that wasn't long overdue, Marcus." She met his gaze steadily. "You might want to call your lawyer before morning." His face paled. "How much do you know?" "Everything," she said simply. "The Westlake project, the environmental report falsifications, the bribes to Commissioner Davis, the Cayman accounts." She leaned closer. "All of it, Marcus, every last dirty deal." Without waiting for his response, Evelyn turned to address the remaining guests, who stood in stunned clusters throughout the ballroom. "I apologize for the dramatic turn of events," she announced, her voice carrying easily across the room. "Please enjoy the rest of the evening. The food is excellent, and I believe we could all use another drink." The guests exchanged uncertain glances. A few made hasty excuses and departed, but most remained too shocked or too curious to leave. The string quartet, after a nod from Evelyn, hesitantly resumed playing. "Mrs. Richardson?" The event coordinator appeared at her elbow, clearly flustered. "Should we continue as planned?" "Absolutely, Sandra. The night is young." Evelyn accepted a fresh glass of champagne from a passing waiter. "Though I believe we'll skip the traditional dance." 3 years earlier, Evelyn had sat in Dr. Patel's office, the words invasive ductal carcinoma hanging in the air between them. Stage 3. Aggressive. Treatment needed to begin immediately. "Mrs. Richardson, do you have any questions?" Dr. Patel had asked gently. Evelyn had looked down at her hands, noticing how her wedding ring caught the fluorescent light. "How long do I have?" "With treatment, potentially many years. Without it?" Dr. Patel hesitated. "Perhaps 5 years, though the quality of life would decline significantly as the disease progressed." That night she had told Harrison over dinner. He'd put down his fork, reached across the table to take her hand, and promised they would face it together. For a moment, she'd glimpsed the man she had fallen in love with decades earlier, before ambition and success had hardened him. True to his word, Harrison had been attentive during her treatment. He'd rearranged meetings to drive her to chemotherapy, held her hair back when she was sick, and hired additional household staff to manage when she was too weak to oversee their home. It was during her 3rd round of chemo that Harrison had mentioned hiring a new executive assistant. "Laurel Davis," he'd said, showing her a resume while they sat in the infusion center. "Top of her class at UW Business School, sharp as a tack. I think she'll be perfect." Evelyn had nodded, too exhausted to engage. She'd noticed the photograph attached to the resume, a striking young woman with intelligent eyes, but thought nothing of it at the time. As her treatment progressed, Harrison's late nights at the office became more frequent. "Major project in the works," he'd explain, kissing her forehead before disappearing into his study with a tumbler of whiskey. "The Westlake development could double our portfolio if it goes through." Evelyn had accepted his explanations without question, focusing her limited energy on survival. The chemotherapy had been brutal, the radiation that followed even worse. There were days when simply getting out of bed had seemed an insurmountable challenge. It was during this dark period that Evelyn had found unexpected solace in reconnecting with literature. Unable to maintain her usual social obligations or household management, she had returned to the classics that had once been her life's work. Propped up in bed, too weak to do much else, She had reread Austen, Bronte, Woolf, women writing about women navigating worlds designed by and for men. Something had awakened in her during those long, quiet days. A recognition, perhaps, of how thoroughly she had subsumed her identity into Harrison's over the decades. Or maybe it was simply the clarity that comes from confronting mortality. The sudden, sharp understanding of how precious time truly is. The first hint of Harrison's affair had come 6 months into her treatment. A receipt for a women's bracelet from Tiffany that hadn't been given to her. A lingering scent of unfamiliar perfume on his suit jacket. Brief whispered phone conversations that ended abruptly when she entered a room. Evelyn had said nothing, gathering evidence with the meticulous attention to detail she had once applied to literary analysis. The occasional hotel charge on his credit card. The increasing frequency with which Laurel's name appeared in his conversations. The way his eyes lit up when he spoke of her. An animation Evelyn hadn't seen directed at herself in years. It was around this time that Evelyn began to pay closer attention to Harrison's business dealings as well. Initially, it had been a distraction from her health concerns and the growing certainty of his infidelity, but what had started as idle curiosity had quickly evolved into something more focused. "Harrison," she had asked one evening as he prepared to leave for yet another late meeting, "could you leave me those contracts for the Westlake project? I'm feeling stronger today, and I'd like to understand more about what's keeping you so busy." He had hesitated, surprise evident in his expression. "They're quite technical, Evelyn. I'm not sure you'd find them very interesting." "Humor me," she had replied with a small smile. "The doctor says keeping my mind active is important for recovery." Reluctantly, he had left her a folder of documents, carefully curated, she was sure, but still revealing enough to someone paying attention. That night, she had photographed every page with her phone before replacing them exactly as he had left them. The next day, she had called an old friend from her university days, Catherine Lewis, now a professor of business law at UW. Under the guise of catching up, Evelyn had asked seemingly innocent questions about real estate development regulations and environmental compliance requirements. Catherine had been happy to explain, even offering to recommend some introductory texts on corporate finance and real estate law. "If you're really interested, Ev," she had said, "I teach a continuing education course on business ethics that covers some of this. You should join us sometime when you're feeling better." What had begun as reconnaissance had become Evelyn's secret education. While Harrison believed she was focused solely on recovery, she was methodically building her knowledge of his business world. She enrolled in Catherine's online course using her maiden name. She read textbooks while Harrison was at work. She researched his competitors, his partners, his projects, and she found discrepancies, numbers that didn't add up, environmental reports with suspiciously favorable findings, properties purchased at mysteriously low prices shortly before rezoning decisions that multiplied their value. The more she learned, the more patterns emerged. Harrison's success, she discovered, had not been built solely on charm and business acumen. There were shadows in the foundation, ethical compromises that had gradually evolved into something more sinister. 6 months ago, when her oncologist had confirmed her cancer was in remission, Evelyn had made a decision. She would use the knowledge she had gained not just to free herself from a marriage that had become a charade, but to ensure Harrison faced consequences for his actions. Her first call had been to James Whitaker, a former student who had become one of Seattle's most respected attorneys. She had prepared meticulously for the meeting, bringing organized evidence of what she had discovered. James had whistled low after reviewing her documents. "This is substantial, Professor Wright." He had fallen back on her old title, a habit from his student days. "What exactly are you hoping to accomplish?" "Justice," she had replied simply, "and a new beginning." With James's guidance, Evelyn had begun the delicate process of legally separating her finances from Harrison's without alerting him. She had opened accounts in her maiden name. She had quietly transferred assets. She had documented everything, building a case that could withstand the inevitable legal challenges. What Harrison had never realized was that his habit of having Evelyn sign documents without reading them carefully, just routine business matters, darling, had given her tremendous power. As his wife and the co-signer on many of his business entities, she had legal standing that even he didn't fully appreciate. Now, as the birthday party awkwardly continued around her, Evelyn circulated among the guests with a composure that unnerved many of them. She accepted condolences and deflected questions with equal grace, her midnight blue dress moving like water through the crowd. At the bar, she found herself beside Judge William Foster, a longtime family friend and frequent dinner guest. "Quite an evening, Evelyn," he commented, signaling the bartender for another scotch. "I can't say I saw any of that coming." "Few did, William. That was rather the point." He studied her over the rim of his glass. "You know he'll fight back. Harrison doesn't take defeat gracefully. I'm counting on it." Evelyn accepted a glass of water from the bartender. "In fact, I've prepared for little else these past months." The judge leaned closer. "Off the record, how much trouble is he in? Legally?" Evelyn considered the question. "That depends on how many people choose to protect him. The evidence I've gathered is substantial, but you know how these things go. Money has a way of blurring legal lines." Judge Foster nodded thoughtfully. "And Marcus? He looked like he'd seen a ghost when you mentioned the Westlake project." "Marcus made his choices long ago," Evelyn replied. "As did I." As midnight approached, the guests gradually departed, many lingering to embrace Evelyn or whisper words of support. By 1 o'clock only a handful remained, including Catherine Lewis, who had watched the evening's events unfold with fascination. "You magnificent woman," Catherine said, linking her arm through Evelyn's as they walked through the now quiet mansion. "You've been planning this for ages, haven't you?" "Since I realized my husband saw my illness as an inconvenience and my aging as an embarrassment." Evelyn paused at the large windows overlooking the lake, moonlight silvering the water. "Did you know he scheduled my chemotherapy appointments on the same days Laurel had her prenatal checkups? Different hospitals, of course, but the same time slots. Efficient, wasn't it?" Catherine's expression hardened. "What will you do now?" "Tonight. Sleep better than I have in years." Evelyn turned from the window. "Tomorrow. Begin dismantling everything Harrison built through deceit and corruption. And if he recovers, he will come after you with everything he has." Evelyn smiled, the same unsettling smile she had worn earlier. "I'm rather hoping he does, Kat. You see, I've left just enough rope for Harrison to hang himself with." She reached into her clutch and withdrew a small flash drive. "This contains only about half of what I've discovered. The rest is my insurance policy." Catherine shook her head in amazement. "The quiet professor I knew at UW would never have imagined you capable of this." "People underestimating me has been my greatest advantage," Evelyn replied. "Harrison most of all." As the last guests departed, Evelyn climbed the grand staircase alone. In the master bedroom, she removed her jewelry and placed it carefully in the antique box Harrison had given her for their 20th anniversary. She changed out of her party dress into silk pajamas, completed her nightly routine, and slipped between the sheets of the king-sized bed. Her phone lit up with a text from Rebecca at the hospital. "Dad stabilized. Not a major heart attack. Doctors keeping him overnight for observation. Should be released tomorrow. Laurel left hours ago." Evelyn typed back, "Thank you, sweetheart. Get some rest. Tomorrow is a new day." Setting the phone aside, she reached for the bedside drawer and removed a manila folder labeled simply Westlake. Inside were documents that would send shockwaves through Seattle's business community. Evidence of environmental report tampering, fraudulent permit applications, and bribes paid to secure approvals for Harrison's most ambitious project to date. Tomorrow, these documents would be delivered to the Seattle Times, the State Attorney General's office, and the FBI's Public Corruption Unit. The information would destroy not just Harrison's reputation, but potentially his freedom. 35 years, Evelyn whispered to the empty room. 35 years of standing in your shadow, Harrison. Tomorrow we step into the light. For the first time in decades, Evelyn fell asleep without waiting to hear her husband's key in the door. Morning light filtered through the plantation shutters, casting slanted patterns across Evelyn's bed. For a moment, disorientation clouded her mind. Harrison's side of the mattress was undisturbed, the house unusually quiet. Then the events of the previous night flooded back, and she sat up suddenly alert. She reached for her phone. 3 missed calls from Rebecca, dozens of text messages from friends, and an email notification that made her breath catch. Seattle Times. Comment request Richardson Properties investigation. It had begun. Evelyn swung her legs over the side of the bed and padded to the window. Outside, 2 news vans were already parked at the edge of the property, kept at bay by the security gate. She allowed herself a small smile. The documents had clearly found their target. Her phone rang, Rebecca again. "Good morning, sweetheart," Evelyn answered, her voice steady. "Mum, have you seen the news?" Rebecca sounded breathless. "It's everywhere. The Westlake documents, the offshore accounts, everything." "I expected as much." A pause. "Mom, did you do this?" "I merely shared information that should have been public long ago." Evelyn moved toward her closet, selecting a simple blue blouse and tailored pants. "How is your father?" "They're releasing him this morning. It was a mild heart attack. Stress-induced, they think." Rebecca's voice lowered. "He's been asking for his lawyer since 5 a.m., and Laurel hasn't returned his calls." Unsurprising on both counts. "Mom, this is serious. The FBI has already contacted the hospital. They want to interview Dad as soon as he's discharged." Evelyn paused, her hand hovering over a pair of pearl earrings. "I see. Did you know that would happen?" "I suspected it might." She slipped the earrings on, studying her reflection. The woman in the mirror looked different somehow, stronger, more defined. "Rebecca, your father has been operating in grey areas for years. Eventually such things catch up to everyone. He could go to prison." "Yes." The simplicity of Evelyn's response hung between them. Rebecca exhaled shakily. "I don't even know who you are right now. I'm the same person I've always been, dear. I've just finally stopped pretending otherwise." Evelyn checked her watch. "I need to go. James will be here soon." "James Whittaker? Your lawyer?" "My former student, yes. Now my attorney." Evelyn moved toward the bedroom door. "Rebecca, I know this is difficult, but I need you to understand something. What's happening now isn't revenge. It's consequence. There's a difference." After ending the call, Evelyn descended the grand staircase. The house felt cavernous without the usual staff. She had given them the day off, anticipating the media circus that would descend once the story broke. In Harrison's study, she activated his computer with the password she'd discovered months ago. His email was flooded with urgent messages from Marcus, their lawyer, Bernard Hathaway, and various business associates. A separate notification showed multiple missed calls from the Seattle Times, Como News, and, most significantly, the FBI's Seattle field office. Evelyn forwarded select emails to her secure account before shutting down the computer. In the kitchen, she made herself a cup of Earl Grey tea and toast, marveling at the ordinary rituals that continued even as her world transformed. The security system chimed, announcing James Whittaker's arrival. Evelyn buzzed him through the gate, watching on the security monitor as he navigated past the growing contingent of reporters. "Professor Wright," he greeted her at the door, deliberately using her maiden name. At 42, James had matured into a formidable attorney with a reputation for ethical ruthlessness. "It appears your plan is proceeding exactly as anticipated. Come in, James." She led him to the sunroom overlooking the lake. "Coffee, please." He set his briefcase on the glass table. "The Westlake documents hit like a bombshell. The Attorney General's office has already convened a special task force." Evelyn nodded, pouring coffee from the carafe she'd prepared. "And my financial arrangements?" "Secure. The transfers were all legal, executed with proper documentation and your authorized signatures. Harrison might challenge them, but he'd be fighting an uphill battle, especially given the current allegations against him. He'll try anyway." James accepted the coffee with a nod of thanks. Of course, men like Harrison don't surrender power willingly. A sharp knock at the front door interrupted them. On the security monitor, Evelyn saw Marcus Tanner's face, tight with barely controlled anger. "I should speak with him," she said, rising. "He deserves that much at least." James looked concerned. "I'd advise against it without me present." "I'll be fine, James." Marcus isn't Harrison. He's always had lines he wouldn't cross. At the door, Marcus looked like he hadn't slept. His normally immaculate appearance was disheveled, his eyes bloodshot. "You've destroyed us," he said without preamble as she let him in. 30 years of work gone overnight. Evelyn led him to the living room, maintaining a careful distance. "I exposed the truth, Marcus. There's a difference. The FBI raided our offices at dawn. They're seizing everything, computers, files, phones. The Westlake investors are in panic mode. Our stock has plummeted." He ran a hand through his silver hair. "Why, Evelyn? Why not just divorce him and take your half? Why this scorched earth approach?" She studied him for a moment. "Because half of something corrupt is still corruption, Marcus. I didn't want any part of it. Not anymore. We built something remarkable. Not everything was done by the book, but we created jobs, revitalized neighborhoods, while poisoning groundwater at the Rainier site, while bribing officials to overlook code violations, while exploiting tax loopholes that robbed schools of funding. Evelyn's voice remained measured. I've read all the reports, Marcus. The actual reports, not the sanitized versions released to the public. Marcus sank onto the sofa, suddenly looking every one of his 65 years. Harrison is being released from the hospital in an hour. The FBI will be waiting. I know. He'll go to prison. Perhaps. Marcus looked up, his expression a mixture of disbelief and reluctant admiration. You really planned all this, while fighting cancer, while he was falling in love with his pregnant assistant, Evelyn finished for him. Yes, though I should clarify, I've been in remission for 2 years. 2 years, Marcus repeated. But Harrison said, Harrison believed what I wanted him to believe. Evelyn sat in the chair opposite him. My oncologist confirmed my remission 25 months ago. I simply neglected to share the extent of the good news with my husband. Understanding dawned on Marcus's face. You used his perception of your vulnerability as cover. I learned from the best, Marcus. Harrison taught me that appearances create reality. People see what they expect to see. Marcus shook his head slowly. Does Laurel know? About the vasectomy? She does now. Evelyn's expression softened slightly. She's not the first young woman Harrison has misled, though perhaps the most ambitious. She believed he would leave you for her, that they would raise the child together. And you, Marcus, what did you believe? He looked away. I thought it was a midlife crisis that would run its course. Harrison has had indiscretions before. I'm aware. Evelyn's tone was dry. Though bringing his pregnant mistress to my birthday celebration was a new low even for him. Marcus winced. That wasn't planned. Laurel insisted on coming. She wanted to stake her claim, as she put it. Well, she certainly succeeded in forcing the issue. Evelyn glanced at her watch. You should go, Marcus. When the FBI finishes with Harrison, they'll be looking for you. He stood reluctantly. What will you do now? Begin again. She walked him to the door. One piece of advice, Marcus, cooperate. Harrison will try to fight to deny everything. Don't follow his lead. As Marcus stepped onto the porch, he turned back. He loved you once, you know, before all of this. I know. Her smile held genuine sadness. But love without respect isn't love at all. Across town, Harrison Richardson sat on the edge of his hospital bed, struggling to knot his tie with shaking hands. The doctor had reluctantly signed his discharge papers after Harrison had threatened legal action if detained any longer. His phone had been buzzing non-stop since dawn, calls from Marcus, from his lawyer, from business associates, suddenly distancing themselves. Nothing from Laurel, which stung more than he cared to admit. Need help with that? Rebecca stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. Please. Harrison dropped his hands, allowing his daughter to approach. Have you spoken to your mother? Rebecca nodded, expertly fixing his tie. Briefly. And nothing. She's with her lawyer. Harrison's jaw tightened. James Whitaker. Never trusted him. You never trusted anyone, Dad. Rebecca stepped back, assessing her work. That's why we're here. Your mother has lost her mind. These accusations. Are they false? Rebecca's direct gaze was so like Evelyn's that Harrison had to look away. Business is complicated. There are always gray areas. That's not an answer. Harrison stood, reaching for his suit jacket. I don't need to explain myself to you, Rebecca. No, you don't. But you'll need to explain yourself to the FBI agents waiting at the nurse's station. His head snapped up. What? They've been here for an hour. They have a warrant. Rebecca moved toward the door. For what it's worth, I convinced them to let you get dressed first. Harrison sank back onto the bed, the reality of his situation finally hitting home. Your mother planned this, all of it. Yes. Rebecca's voice was soft. While you were planning your new life with Laurel. That's different, is it? She crossed her arms. You know what I keep thinking about? When I was 12, and I plagiarized that book report. Remember what you told me when Mom caught me? Harrison remained silent. You said, the mistake wasn't plagiarizing, it was getting caught. I think about that a lot, Dad. About the lessons you taught me. Before Harrison could respond, 2 men in dark suits appeared in the doorway, their expressions professionally neutral. Mr. Richardson, I'm Special Agent Carver with the FBI. This is Agent Dawson. We need to ask you some questions about the Westlake Development Project. Harrison straightened his spine, the businessman's mask sliding into place. My lawyer will meet us at your office. I have nothing to say until then. That's your right, Agent Carver acknowledged. But we're executing a search warrant for your personal devices and papers. We'll need your phone, laptop, and any other electronic devices in your possession. As the agents led Harrison from the room, Rebecca remained behind, her eyes fixed on the window overlooking the Seattle skyline. In the distance, she could just make out the construction cranes at the Westlake site, iron sentinels now standing guard over her father's collapsing empire. The news broke across Seattle like wildfire. By afternoon, every major outlet was running the story. Richardson Properties under federal investigation, magnate questioned by FBI. Helicopter footage showed Harrison being escorted into the federal building downtown, his lawyer hurrying to keep pace. In a sleek downtown apartment, Laurel Davis sat on her balcony staring at her phone. Dozens of missed calls from Harrison, none of which she had answered. Her hand rested on her pregnant belly, her mind racing with calculations and contingency plans. The paternity test results glowed on her iPad screen. 99.9% certainty that Mark Jennings, her ex-boyfriend from Minneapolis, was the father of her child. She had known this for months, but had convinced herself that Harrison would never question it, that he would be so flattered by the idea of fatherhood at 62 that he would simply accept the child as his own. Now, everything was falling apart. Her career at Richardson Properties was over. Her carefully cultivated relationship with Harrison, built on late nights, strategic competence, and calculated vulnerability, had imploded spectacularly. Worst of all, Mark had no idea she was pregnant with his child. Laurel closed the paternity results and opened her banking app. The balance mocked her. $12,432.87, not nearly enough to start over the way she had planned. She had been banking on Harrison, on becoming the second Mrs. Richardson with all the security and luxury that entailed. Her phone rang, an unfamiliar number with a Seattle area code. Against her better judgment, she answered. "Ms. Davis, this is Catherine Lewis, a friend of Evelyn Richardson's. I think we should talk." Back at the Richardson estate, Evelyn sat with James in the garden, reviewing documents and preparing for the inevitable legal battles ahead. "Harrison's lawyers will move quickly to freeze the assets you've transferred," James warned. "We should expect emergency motions as soon as tomorrow." "Let them try." Evelyn sipped her tea. "Every transfer is documented, signed, and legally executed. I have copies of Harrison signing everything." James raised an eyebrow. "He signed knowingly?" "He signed without reading, as he always has." A small, satisfied smile played at her lips. "Harrison's greatest weakness has always been his arrogance. He believed I was too naive to understand what I was signing all these years. It never occurred to him that the same might be true in reverse." James nodded appreciatively. "Still, this will get ugly." "I'm counting on it." Evelyn set down her cup. "The uglier it gets, the more Harrison will reveal about himself. He can't help it. His ego won't allow him to appear vulnerable or foolish. And Laurel? Catherine is speaking with her now. I expect she'll be receptive to a reasonable arrangement." James looked surprised. "You're offering her a settlement? After everything?" "Laurel is carrying an innocent child, James. Whatever her motives, that child deserves a secure start in life." Evelyn gazed out at the lake. "Besides, in many ways, she's as much Harrison's victim as I was, just at a different stage of the game." The security system chimed, announcing Rebecca's arrival. A moment later, she joined them in the garden, visibly exhausted. "How bad is it?" Evelyn asked, pouring her daughter a cup of tea. "Bad." Rebecca accepted the cup gratefully. "The FBI has enough to charge him with fraud, bribery, tax evasion, and environmental violations. Bernard is trying to negotiate, but—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "They want someone higher up," James guessed. "The officials who took the bribes." Rebecca nodded. "Dad refuses to cooperate. Says he won't throw friends under the bus. Whatever that means." "It means he still thinks his network will protect him," Evelyn said quietly. "He doesn't understand that the rules have changed." Rebecca studied her mother across the table. "You've changed, Mum. I've never seen you like this." "Cancer changes you," Evelyn replied simply. "When you face your mortality, priorities shift. But you've been in remission for 2 years. Why wait until now?" Evelyn reached for her daughter's hand. "I needed time. Time to learn, to gather evidence, to build a new foundation for myself." She squeezed gently. "And if I'm honest, part of me hoped Harrison might change, might become the man I thought I married all those years ago. And last night at the party, was the final confirmation that he never would. Evelyn's expression hardened momentarily. Bringing Laurel to my birthday celebration, announcing their relationship that way, it was deliberately cruel, designed to humiliate me at what should have been a moment of celebration. Rebecca nodded slowly. All those nights you spent in Dad's study during your recovery, you weren't just catching up on reading, were you? No, I was learning his business from the inside out. The passwords, the accounts, the partners, the deals. Evelyn smiled wryly. Your father never changed his passwords. Rebecca, 1994, your birth year for everything. A rare sentimental streak in an otherwise calculating man. What happens now? Now. Evelyn looked out over the water, where the late afternoon sun was turning Elliott Bay to molten gold. Now I build a life that's truly mine. Rebecca hesitated. The FBI agent mentioned something. He said there was evidence that Dad knew about toxic chemicals at the Rainier site, but built affordable housing there anyway. Is that true? Evelyn's expression grew solemn. Yes. The soil testing showed dangerous levels of industrial chemicals, but Harrison had the reports altered. He saved millions by not doing proper remediation. People live there. Families. Children. I know. Evelyn's voice was quiet, but resolute. That's when I knew I couldn't just walk away with my half, Rebecca. Some things can't be divided. Some responsibilities can't be shirked. As twilight descended over the lake, Evelyn Richardson sat surrounded by the trappings of the life she had helped build. The mansion, the manicured gardens, the prestigious address. By this time tomorrow, much of it would be in flux, caught in the legal storm brewing on the horizon. But for the first time in decades, Evelyn felt no anxiety about the future. At 60, with cancer behind her and hard-won wisdom ahead, she had discovered a fundamental truth. It is never too late to rewrite your own story. 2 years ago, she said softly, almost to herself, my doctor told me the cancer was gone. A second chance, he called it. She looked at her daughter, her eyes clear and determined. I'm not wasting it. The setting sun cast long shadows across the garden, marking the end of one day and the promise of another. For Evelyn Richardson, soon to be Evelyn Wright once more, each sunset now held possibility rather than regret. Each sunrise the opportunity to reclaim what had been surrendered long ago. Her dignity, her purpose, herself. 3 months passed like a storm front, turbulent, transformative, and leaving a changed landscape in its wake. Evelyn sipped her morning coffee on the deck of her new beach house in Cannon Beach, Oregon. The rhythmic crash of Pacific waves provided a constant soundtrack, so different from the manicured silence of Mercer Island. She had purchased the property 2 weeks after filing for divorce, paying cash from one of the accounts she had established during her methodical preparation. The morning paper lay open on the weathered teak table. Harrison's face stared back from the business section, a courtroom sketch rather than his usual polished headshot. The headline was succinct. Richardson pleads not guilty to federal charges. Still fighting, Evelyn murmured to herself, folding the paper closed. Did you expect anything else? Rebecca emerged from the house carrying her own steaming mug, her hair tousled from sleep. She had been staying at the beach house for the past week, ostensibly to help her mother settle in, though they both knew it was as much about her own need to escape Seattle's whispers. No. Harrison will fight until the bitter end. Evelyn pulled her cardigan tighter against the morning breeze. It's what made him successful and what will ultimately destroy him. Rebecca settled into the adjacent Adirondack chair, tucking her feet beneath her. The prosecution offered a deal yesterday, Bernie called to tell me. And Dad rejected it outright. 5 years with possibility of parole after 3, in exchange for testimony against Commissioner Davis and the others. Evelyn nodded, unsurprised. His pride won't allow it. Cooperation would mean admitting he was caught, truly caught. Is that why you turned down the money? Pride, Rebecca asked, referring to Evelyn's decision to forego alimony in the divorce settlement, a move that had stunned Harrison's attorneys. Not pride, freedom. Evelyn smiled slightly. I took what I helped build, my fair share of the legitimate assets. I want nothing from the rest of it. The divorce had been finalized with unprecedented speed, facilitated by Harrison's desperate need to liquidate assets for his legal defense. Evelyn had negotiated from a position of surprising strength, backing her demands with meticulously documented evidence of financial malfeasance that Harrison couldn't risk exposing in court. In the end, She had walked away with the art collection they had built together, her personal investments and several properties that had been purchased with clean money. The Mercer Island mansion, now worth significantly less due to the scandal, was being sold to cover Harrison's mounting legal fees. "James called last night," Evelyn said, changing the subject. "The FBI wants to interview me again about the Rainier site." Rebecca tensed. "They're not suggesting you were involved?" "No. They're building their environmental crimes case and need my testimony about when I discovered the altered reports." The Rainier site had emerged as the most damaging aspect of the case against Harrison. What had begun as a fraud investigation had expanded when Evelyn provided documents showing Harrison had knowingly built affordable housing on contaminated land, potentially exposing hundreds of families to carcinogenic chemicals. "The relocation fund is officially established," Evelyn continued. $7 million to help the Rainier residents find new homes while the site is remediated. Rebecca's eyebrows rose. $7 million? I thought you were contributing $3 million. I was. Catherine convinced 2 other developers to match a portion. They're eager to distance themselves from Harrison's methods. Catherine Lewis had become Evelyn's unexpected ally in the aftermath of the scandal. The law professor had mobilized her extensive network, helping Evelyn navigate both the legal complexities and the social fallout of her actions. "Have you heard from Laurel?" Rebecca asked carefully. Evelyn nodded. "She's back in Minneapolis. The baby is due next month." The arrangement with Laurel had been straightforward. In exchange for her cooperation with federal investigators, Evelyn had established a trust fund for the unborn child, modest enough to avoid accusations of buying testimony, substantial enough to ensure the baby's future education would be secure. She reached out to the biological father, Evelyn continued. Apparently he was surprisingly receptive. "They're trying to work things out." "That's unexpectedly decent of him. People can surprise you." Evelyn gazed at the horizon, where the ocean met the morning sky in a blurred line of grey, for better or worse. Rebecca studied her mother's profile. At 60, Evelyn had shed more than her married name. She had abandoned the carefully maintained appearance of the perfect corporate wife, the tailored suits, the subdued colors, the understated jewelry that signaled wealth without ostentation. Today, her silver hair fell in loose waves around her shoulders, and she wore simple linen pants with a soft blue sweater. Without the constant pressure to present a certain image, Evelyn had relaxed into a natural elegance that made her appear years younger. "Mum, are you really okay?" Rebecca asked suddenly. "With everything that's happened, I mean." Evelyn considered the question, watching a pair of sandpipers dart along the shoreline. "I'm becoming okay. It's a process." She turned to face her daughter. "For 35 years I defined myself in relation to Harrison. Supporting his dreams, managing his home, advancing his social standing. Finding my own center again takes time. You seem different, lighter somehow. Cancer taught me how precious time is. Harrison's betrayal taught me how precious self-respect is." Evelyn smiled. "Expensive lessons, but valuable ones." The sound of tires on gravel announced a visitor. Moments later, a tall woman with short grey hair rounded the corner of the house carrying a basket. "Elaine!" Evelyn rose to greet her new neighbor, a retired surgeon who had welcomed her to Cannon Beach with homemade bread and practical advice about coastal living. "Come join us for coffee." "Can't stay long," Elaine replied, setting the basket on the table. "Book club preparations. But I brought those oceanography books we discussed and some fresh cinnamon rolls." Elaine Palmer had become the cornerstone of Evelyn's new social circle, a group of accomplished women who had chosen the Oregon coast for their next chapter. Artists, academics, retired professionals, they had embraced Evelyn without judgment, offering friendship without the baggage of her Seattle history. After Elaine departed with promises of dinner the following evening, Rebecca turned to her mother with a knowing smile. "What?" Evelyn asked. "Nothing. It's just, you've built a life here in 3 months that seems more authentic than 30 years in Seattle. Not more authentic, just uncomplicated." Evelyn began gathering the breakfast dishes. "There's freedom in starting over, Rebecca, in choosing relationships based on genuine connection rather than strategic advantage." Rebecca helped clear the table, a comfortable silence settling between them. This too was new, a relationship evolving from mother-daughter into something approaching friendship. "I've been thinking about moving to Portland," Rebecca said as they entered the kitchen. "It's close enough to visit often, but far enough from Seattle to avoid the constant questions. Evelyn set down the dishes, surprised. "What about your position at the foundation?" "I can work remotely most of the time, and honestly, the Richardson Family Foundation needs distance from the Richardson name right now." The foundation, which Rebecca had directed for the past 5 years, had been caught in the crossfire of Harrison's downfall. Though legally separate from his business entities, its reputation had suffered by association. "You don't need to uproot your life because of what happened," Evelyn said gently. "It's not just that." Rebecca leaned against the counter. "Watching you rebuild, it's inspired me. I've spent my entire adult life trying to compensate for Dad's approach to business, funding environmental initiatives while he polluted, supporting affordable housing while he cut corners. Maybe it's time I defined my own path too." Evelyn embraced her daughter, recognizing in her words the same awakening she had experienced after her cancer diagnosis. "Whatever you decide, I'm here." Rebecca's phone chimed with an incoming text. Her expression darkened as she read it. "What is it?" Evelyn asked. "It's from Dad's assistant. He's being released from the hospital today." Harrison had suffered a second, more serious heart attack 2 weeks earlier during a pre-trial hearing. The episode had further complicated the legal proceedings, with his attorneys arguing he was too frail to withstand the stress of a trial. "The prosecution thinks it's an act," Rebecca continued, scrolling through the message. "They're pushing ahead with the trial date." "And what do you think?" Rebecca sighed. "I think he's genuinely unwell, but also milking it for all it's worth. Classic Dad, turning even a health crisis into leverage." Evelyn returned to the deck, needing the open space and fresh air. The newspaper still lay on the table, Harrison's courtroom sketch facing upward. Despite everything, she felt a twist of complex emotion looking at his drawn features. "He's asked to see you," Rebecca said, following her outside. "That's the real reason for the text. He wants to meet." Evelyn's hands tightened around the porch railing. "Why now?" "His lawyers are floating the possibility of a cardiac event during trial. They probably want you to support some kind of compassionate release arrangement." "After everything, he still thinks I'll rescue him." Evelyn shook her head, a mixture of disbelief and weariness in her voice. "Will you see him?" The question hung in the salt-laden air. Below them, waves continued their eternal rhythm against the shore, indifferent to human dilemmas. "I don't know," Evelyn admitted finally. "There's a part of me that thought we were finished, that the divorce finalized the end of our connection. But 35 years doesn't disappear with a signature on legal documents." She turned to face her daughter. "There are things I need to understand. Questions only Harrison can answer." Rebecca looked concerned. "He'll try to manipulate you. It's what he does. I know, but I'm not the same woman he married, or the same woman he betrayed." Evelyn's expression hardened slightly. "I survived cancer. I survived his infidelity. I survived the dismantling of the life we built together. Whatever Harrison thinks he can accomplish by meeting with me, he'll find I'm not easily swayed anymore." That evening, as darkness settled over the coast, Evelyn sat alone by a driftwood fire on the beach. The flames cast shifting patterns of light across the sand, hypnotic and primal. In her hand she held her phone, Harrison's assistant's contact information displayed on the screen. Meeting him would risk reopening wounds that had just begun to heal. It would mean stepping back into the turbulence she had so deliberately left behind. Yet something, curiosity perhaps, or the human need for closure, made her thumb hover over the call button. A text from Catherine interrupted her contemplation. "News breaking tomorrow about Commissioner Davis. FBI flipped him. Harrison's position just got significantly worse." Evelyn stared at the message, understanding its implications immediately. Davis had been Harrison's longest-standing connection in local government, their relationship dating back to Harrison's first major development. If he was cooperating with federal investigators, the case against Harrison had moved from strong to virtually unassailable. As if on cue, her phone rang, Harrison's private number, not his assistant's. After a moment's hesitation, Evelyn answered. "Hello, Harrison." "Evelyn." His voice sounded thinner than she remembered. The characteristic confidence diminished. "Thank you for picking up. What do you want?" A pause, then, "I need to see you. There are things I need to say, explanations I need to give." "I think we're well past explanations, don't you?" "Please." The word sounded foreign coming from him. In 35 years of marriage, she could count on one hand the times Harrison Richardson had said, "Please," and meant it. Not for the case, not for the lawyers, just for us. Evelyn watched the fire consume a piece of salt-bleached wood, transforming it to glowing embers. "There is no us anymore, Harrison. You made that abundantly clear at my birthday party. I was a fool." His voice cracked slightly. "A vain, arrogant fool. I see that now. Clarity often comes too late." Another pause, longer this time. "The doctors say I might need bypass surgery. The blockage is severe." Evelyn closed her eyes, steeling herself against the flicker of concern his words evoked. "I'm sorry to hear that. I don't deserve your sympathy." He coughed, a wet, worrying sound. "But I'm asking for your presence." "One conversation, Evelyn. After 35 years, I think we owe each other that much." The manipulation was transparent yet effective. Harrison had always known which emotional levers to pull. "When?" she asked finally. "Tomorrow. My place in the city." The relief in his voice was palpable. "I'll text you the address." After ending the call, Evelyn remained by the fire until it burned down to embers. The tide had begun its retreat, leaving wet, gleaming sand in its wake. Tomorrow she would drive to Seattle and face Harrison, not as his wife, not as his victim, but as his equal. The meeting carried risks. Harrison was cornered, desperate, and still formidable despite his health problems. Whatever he wanted from her went beyond reconciliation or closure. Harrison Richardson had never sought a conversation without strategic purpose. Yet as she walked back to her beach house under a canopy of stars, Evelyn felt a strange calm. Whatever tomorrow brought, she would face it on her terms. The woman who had once subordinated her dreams to Harrison's ambitions was gone, replaced by someone stronger, clearer, and unafraid of final confrontations. Inside, she found Rebecca asleep on the couch, research papers from the foundation spread across her lap. Evelyn gently removed them and covered her daughter with a blanket, struck by how young she looked in sleep and how much like her father, despite their complicated relationship. Tomorrow's meeting with Harrison would be difficult, but necessary, not just for herself but for Rebecca. For all of them to truly move forward, the past needed proper burial. Evelyn moved to the kitchen window, looking out at the moonlight silvering the ocean. In the distance, the beam from Tillamook Lighthouse swept regularly across the water, a warning and a guide simultaneously. Her phone chimed with an incoming text. The address Harrison had promised, followed by a time, 2 p.m., and beneath it, 3 words that made her breath catch. "I found everything." The drive from Cannon Beach to Seattle stretched longer than the actual miles, each familiar landmark along I-5, pulling Evelyn deeper into her past. Mount St. Helens loomed in the distance, its truncated peak a reminder that even the most permanent fixtures could be transformed in an instant. "You don't have to do this," Rebecca said from the passenger seat, breaking a silence that had lasted since Olympia. "Whatever game he's playing, you don't have to participate." Evelyn kept her eyes on the road. "It's not about games anymore. It's about ending things properly." "What did he mean?" "I found everything." "I don't know." Evelyn's grip tightened imperceptibly on the steering wheel, but Harrison wouldn't reach out if he didn't think he had leverage. The address Harrison had provided led them to an upscale apartment building in downtown Seattle, far from their Mercer Island mansion but still unmistakably expensive. A doorman escorted them to a private elevator that opened directly into a penthouse apartment, offering panoramic views of Elliott Bay. Harrison stood at the window, his back to them as they entered. He had lost weight, his tailored suit hanging slightly loose on his frame. When he turned, Evelyn was struck by how much older he looked. The heart attacks had left their mark in the pallor of his skin and the new caution in his movements. "Evelyn." His eyes moved to Rebecca. "I didn't expect you to bring company." "I'm not staying," Rebecca said firmly. "Just making sure Mom gets home safely afterward." Harrison nodded, accepting this arrangement without argument. Another sign of how much had changed. The Harrison she had known would have insisted on controlling every aspect of the meeting. "There's a coffee shop across the street," Evelyn told her daughter. "I'll text you when we're finished." After Rebecca departed, an awkward silence filled the space between them. Once they had moved in synchrony through shared spaces, anticipating each other's needs and movements, with the familiarity of decades together. Now they stood like strangers, uncertain of the new boundaries. "Would you like something to drink?" Harrison finally asked. "Water, coffee?" No. Evelyn remained standing, unwilling to settle into what could become a prolonged conversation. Your message said you found something. What was it? Harrison gestured toward the living area. Please, sit. This isn't a conversation to have standing in the entryway. Reluctantly, Evelyn moved to the sofa, noting the pill bottles arranged on the side table and the oxygen tank discreetly positioned nearby. Harrison lowered himself carefully into the armchair opposite her. My health is worse than they're reporting, he said without preamble. The second heart attack caused significant damage. I need a triple bypass, but my condition makes the surgery high risk. Evelyn kept her expression neutral. I'm sorry to hear that, but I assume that's not why you asked me here. No. Harrison reached for a folder on the coffee table. 3 weeks ago, my attorneys gained access to a storage unit registered in your name. Inside, they found these. He slid the folder toward her. Inside were photographs, dozens of them spanning years. Harrison with various women, all young, all beautiful, all clearly involved with him in ways that went beyond professional relationships. 30 years of infidelities, Harrison continued, meticulously documented. You've known all along, haven't you? Evelyn closed the folder, her face betraying nothing. Not all along, but for many years, yes. Why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you leave? The question hung between them, weighted with decades of unspoken truths. At first, because I loved you, Evelyn replied simply. Later, because I had surrendered so much of myself to our marriage that I wasn't sure who I would be without it. And finally, because I was making plans. Harrison's expression shifted, anger mingling with a reluctant respect. The cancer diagnosis wasn't just a health crisis for you. It was an awakening. Yes. And Laurel? You knew about her from the beginning? I suspected. Then I confirmed. Evelyn met his gaze directly. Did you really think I wouldn't notice the prenatal vitamins in her desk drawer? The way she touched her stomach instinctively when you entered a room? I've spent decades watching you with women, Harrison. I recognize the patterns. He looked away first, uncomfortable with her directness. The vasectomy revelation was effective. How long had you been waiting to deploy that particular weapon? It wasn't a weapon. It was the truth. Evelyn leaned forward slightly. But we're not here to discuss Laurel. What do you want, Harrison? He hesitated, then reached for another folder. This one thicker, bound with an elastic band. These were also in the storage unit. Copies of documents dating back 15 years. Financial records, offshore account details, meeting notes with dates and participants. Evelyn said nothing, watching as he spread several papers on the table. You weren't just gathering evidence these past few years, Harrison continued. You've been documenting everything since the Westbrook development in 2010. That's when you first suspected something wasn't right, isn't it? The environmental consultant who died suddenly, Evelyn said quietly. Andrew Mills, 34 years old, no health issues, found dead of an apparent heart attack the day before he was scheduled to testify about soil contamination. You came home that night and drank an entire bottle of scotch. Harrison's expression remained carefully neutral. I had nothing to do with his death. Perhaps not directly, but you benefited from it. She nodded toward the papers. That's when I began keeping records, not with any plan to use them, just as insurance, self-protection. And these? Harrison pulled out another set of documents. Bank transfers from the Caymans, shell companies, property purchases in Prague, Buenos Aires, Singapore, all in your maiden name or through corporations I never knew existed. Now it was Evelyn's turn to feel exposed. My separate finances started with my inheritance from my parents, grown carefully over the years, using information you gleaned from our business dealings. Harrison's voice hardened. Inside information, Evelyn, potentially illegal. She met his gaze steadily. No laws were broken. I made educated investments based on general market knowledge and trends I observed. Unlike you, I didn't need to bribe officials or falsify reports to succeed. Harrison sat back, grimacing slightly with the movement. So here we are, each of us with evidence that could further damage the other. Is that what this meeting is about? Mutually assured destruction? Evelyn gestured toward the scattered papers. What do you hope to accomplish, Harrison? Survival. He reached for a glass of water, his hand trembling slightly. The federal prosecutors are pushing for a 20-year sentence. At my age, with my health, it's a death sentence. And you think I can help you avoid that? I think we can help each other. Harrison set down the glass carefully. Your financial maneuvers might withstand scrutiny, but the investigation would be unpleasant, invasive. Your new life in Oregon would be disrupted, your reputation questioned. Evelyn felt a familiar tightening in her chest, the old anxiety that had accompanied so many of Harrison's subtle threats over the years. The difference was that now she recognized it for what it was, a conditioned response to manipulation, not a rational fear. "What exactly are you proposing?" she asked, her voice calm despite the internal tension. "Testify that you had no knowledge of my business practices, that I kept you completely in the dark." Harrison leaned forward, eyes intent. "In return, I'll destroy all evidence connecting you to potentially questionable investments." "And the affair documentation? The photos?" "Irrelevant now that we're divorced." He shrugged. "Keep them if you want. Burn them. They no longer matter." Evelyn studied the man across from her, diminished physically but still calculating, still believing he could control the narrative. For a moment she saw him as he had been when they first met, ambitious, charismatic, brimming with plans for a future that seemed limitless. "You haven't changed at all, have you?" she said softly. Harrison frowned. "What do you mean? Even now, facing prison, facing mortality, you're still trying to manipulate the situation to your advantage, still seeing relationships as transactions." "I'm fighting for my life, Evelyn." "No." She shook her head slowly. "You're fighting for your comfort, for your reputation, for control, the same things you've always fought for." Harrison's expression hardened. "Don't pretend you're above self-interest. Everything you've done, the evidence gathering, the financial maneuvers, the public humiliation at your birthday, it was all calculated for maximum impact." "The difference is my motivation," Evelyn replied. "I wasn't seeking revenge, Harrison. I was seeking justice for the families at the Rainier site, for the environmental damage your projects caused, for the corruption you spread through city government." "How noble," he said, unable to keep the bitterness from his voice. "Saint Evelyn, sacrificing herself for the greater good. Not a saint, just someone who finally recognized her own complicity in your actions." She gestured toward the documents. "Yes, I kept records. Yes, I made investments based on knowledge I gained as your wife, but I never crossed the legal line you did repeatedly." Harrison laughed, a harsh sound that triggered a fit of coughing. When he recovered, he fixed her with a cold stare. "If you won't help me, I'll release everything. The questionable investments, the carefully timed market moves. I'll make sure the prosecutors look into every cent you've earned." "Go ahead." Evelyn's voice was steady. "I've prepared for that possibility. My finances are documented, legitimate, and will withstand scrutiny. And your reputation, the dignified Evelyn Richardson, revealed to have been building a separate financial empire while playing the supportive wife. The press will have a field day." "Perhaps." She smiled slightly. "But unlike you, Harrison, my self-worth isn't bound up in what others think of me. Not anymore." Harrison's face flushed with anger. 35 years of marriage, and this is your response? I'm offering you a clean break, protection from investigation, and you're refusing out of what? Moral superiority. I'm refusing because it's time for truth, not more manipulation. Evelyn stood, smoothing her slacks with a deliberate gesture. "I won't perjure myself to protect you from consequences you've earned." Harrison rose as well, moving with the careful deliberation of someone in pain. "You'll regret this decision." "I don't think I will." Evelyn gathered her purse, preparing to leave. "But there is something I regret, Harrison." "What's that?" "I regret that it took me so long to recognize what our marriage truly was. Not a partnership, but a power dynamic. Not love, but ownership." She moved toward the door. "I'm sorry it's ending this way." Harrison crossed the room with unexpected quickness, blocking her path. "It doesn't have to end this way. There's still time to reconsider." For a moment, they stood close enough that Evelyn could detect the medicinal smell that now overlaid his familiar cologne. His breathing was labored from the short exertion, confirming that his health concerns were genuine. "Move aside, Harrison. Not until you listen to reason." He placed a hand on her arm, not forcefully, but with the presumed intimacy of someone who had once had every right to touch her. "We built an empire together, Evelyn. Everything I did, the corners cut, the rules bent, it was all to secure our future, our legacy. No, it was for your ambition, your ego." She removed his hand gently but firmly. "My great mistake was confusing your needs with my own for so many years." Harrison's expression changed, a calculating look entering his eyes. If you walk out that door, I'm calling Marcus, telling him to release everything to the press, your separate accounts, your investment strategies, all of it. That would be your choice. Evelyn reached for the door handle. But before you do, you should know that Marcus won't be taking your calls anymore. Harrison froze. What do you mean? Marcus accepted a plea deal yesterday. Full cooperation in exchange for reduced charges. Evelyn allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. Those files you found in my storage unit. Copies. The originals were provided to federal prosecutors months ago by Marcus, not by me. The color drained from Harrison's face. You're lying. Catherine confirmed it this morning. Marcus has been working with the FBI since the week after my birthday party. She opened the door. Goodbye, Harrison. Wait. His voice had lost its commanding edge, replaced by something close to panic. I need more time. Time for what? To fix this. To negotiate a better deal. He moved back to the coffee table, rifling through papers with trembling hands. There are options still. Offshore accounts the investigators haven't found. Connections who can help. Evelyn watched him, feeling a complex mixture of pity and detachment. It's over, Harrison. All the maneuvers, all the deals, all the manipulations. It's time to accept what comes next. Easy for you to say, he snapped, abandoning his search to face her. You're starting a new life while mine is ending. Everything I built, gone, my reputation, my company, my freedom, all because you decided to play judge and executioner. No, all because you chose profit over people, power over integrity. Evelyn's voice remained calm. Your actions caused this outcome, Harrison, not mine. For a moment, something unreadable flickered in his eyes. Perhaps recognition, perhaps regret. Then it was gone, replaced by the hardened resolve that had driven him throughout his career. This isn't finished between us, he said quietly. One way or another, I'll find a way through this. I always do. Not this time. Evelyn stepped into the hallway. The difference is that now, finally, there are consequences you can't charm, bribe, or intimidate your way out of. As she walked toward the elevator, she heard a crash from inside the apartment, glass shattering against a wall in what she recognized as one of Harrison's controlled outbursts. Once, such displays had frightened her into compliance. Now they only confirmed the rightness of her decision. In the lobby, Rebecca waited anxiously despite the arrangement to meet at the coffee shop. What happened? She asked, falling into step beside Evelyn as they exited the building. You look, I don't know. Different? Your father tried to leverage some old financial records against me, Evelyn explained as they walked to the car. He wanted me to testify that I knew nothing about his business practices. Rebecca looked alarmed. Can he hurt you with those records? No. Evelyn unlocked the car with a decisive click. Everything I did was legal, if perhaps ethically questionable in some cases. But more importantly, the prosecutors already have all the evidence they need from Marcus. Marcus flipped on Dad. Rebecca's eyes widened. I didn't think he had it in him. Self-preservation is a powerful motivator. Evelyn slid into the driver's seat, suddenly eager to leave Seattle behind. Your father is running out of allies and options. As they drove away from the city, Evelyn felt a weight lifting, not just from this confrontation, but from decades of compromise and concession. Harrison's attempt at manipulation had reaffirmed that she had made the right choice in walking away, in refusing to continue the patterns that had defined their relationship. Do you think he'll really go to prison? Rebecca asked, as the Seattle skyline receded in the rearview mirror. Yes? Evelyn merged onto I-5 South, pointed toward the coast and her new home. The evidence is too substantial, and now with Marcus testifying, he'll never survive it, not with his health issues. The statement hung between them. A daughter's concern for her father despite everything, a pragmatic assessment of difficult realities. He's made arrangements, Evelyn said after a moment. Offshore accounts, contingency plans. Harrison always prepares for every possibility. Except for you standing up to him, Rebecca observed quietly. That was the one scenario he never seriously considered. Evelyn allowed herself a small smile. It was his blind spot, and ultimately his downfall. As they drove south toward Oregon, Evelyn's phone rang, James Whitaker's number flashing on the car's display. Evelyn, James began without preliminary greetings. Harrison's lawyers just filed an emergency motion. They're claiming you coerced him during your meeting today, used his medical condition to extract confessions under duress. That's absurd, Evelyn replied, keeping her eyes on the road. He invited me. There were security cameras in the lobby, the elevator. It's a desperate play, but one that could complicate things. James's voice was tight with controlled anger. They're also moving to reopen the divorce settlement, claiming you concealed assets. Rebecca made a sound of outrage beside her, but Evelyn remained calm. Let them try, she said simply. Everything is documented, everything transparent. There's more, James continued. They've subpoenaed records for all your accounts, including those under your maiden name. They're casting a wide net, hoping to find something, anything they can use against you. Evelyn absorbed this information, considering its implications. Harrison is lashing out, using the legal system as his weapon of choice. Yes, but a wounded animal is often the most dangerous. After ending the call, Evelyn drove in silence for several miles, processing this latest development. Harrison's desperate countermove was predictable, a scorched earth approach when more subtle tactics had failed. Are you worried? Rebecca finally asked. No. The certainty in Evelyn's voice surprised even her. I've spent years preparing for this possibility. There are no hidden accounts, no questionable transactions that can't be explained. Dad seems determined to drag you down with him. That's who he's always been, Rebecca. Success for Harrison has always been relative, measured not just by his own achievements, but by maintaining dominance over others. Evelyn signaled for the coastal highway exit, leaving the interstate behind. But he's fighting old battles with outdated weapons. I'm not the same woman he's trying to control. As they turned west toward the ocean, Evelyn felt the last tendrils of anxiety uncoil from around her heart. Whatever legal challenges Harrison might mount, whatever accusations he might make, she had already won the most important victory: freedom from the patterns of manipulation and control that had defined their relationship for decades. The road curved toward the coast, offering glimpses of the Pacific between stands of towering evergreens. Ahead lay Cannon Beach, her new home, her new beginning. Behind remained Seattle, Harrison, and the remnants of a life that no longer served her. At 60, Evelyn Wright had finally learned what had eluded her for decades, that dignity wasn't found in social status or reflected glory, but in standing firmly in one's own truth, even when that truth came at a steep price. The setting sun broke through the clouds as they crested the final hill, bathing the coastline in golden light. Below, the endless rhythm of waves continued their eternal dance with the shore, advancing, retreating, reshaping. Nature's reminder that transformation, while often turbulent, was the only constant. The trial of Harrison Richardson dominated Seattle's headlines for 6 weeks. Each day brought new revelations, each testimony another crack in the carefully constructed facade of one of the city's most powerful men. Evelyn attended only twice, once for Marcus Tanner's testimony and once for the closing arguments. She sat in the back row, observing the proceedings with a detachment that surprised even her. On the day of the verdict, Evelyn was planting lavender along the stone path leading to her beach house. The salt-laden wind tousled her silver hair as she worked the soil with bare hands, finding unexpected solace in the simple act of nurturing growth. When her phone rang, she knew without checking the caller ID that it would be Rebecca. Guilty, Rebecca said without preamble, 15 counts, including fraud, bribery, tax evasion, and environmental violations. Evelyn sat back on her heels, a complex wave of emotions washing over her: relief, vindication, and a thread of sadness for what might have been. Sentencing is in 2 weeks, Rebecca continued. The prosecution is asking for 18 years. And his health? A pause. The judge has ordered an independent medical evaluation. Dad's lawyers are pushing for house arrest based on his condition, but after the stunt he pulled with the emergency motion against you. Evelyn removed her gardening gloves, brushing soil from her knees as she stood. How are you feeling about all this? Rebecca's sigh carried through the connection. Conflicted. He's still my father, despite everything. But what he did, especially at the Rainier site, knowing people could get sick. Her voice trailed off. I understand, Evelyn said gently. The man who taught you to ride a bike and the man who poisoned a community for profit exist in the same person. Both realities are true. After ending the call, Evelyn walked to the edge of her property where the manicured lawn gave way to wild beach grasses. In the distance, Haystack Rock stood sentinel against the horizon, its silhouette sharp in the clear afternoon light. She had chosen this place deliberately. far from Seattle's social circles, but close enough that Rebecca could visit easily. A place neither she nor Harrison had ever been together, untainted by shared memories. That evening, as she prepared dinner, her doorbell rang, an unexpected sound in her now quiet life. Through the window she recognized Catherine Lewis's angular form on the porch, along with another, less familiar figure. "Sorry to arrive unannounced," Catherine said as Evelyn opened the door, "but we were in Portland for a conference and thought you might like to hear the latest developments in person." The woman beside Catherine stepped forward, extending her hand. "Elena Cortez. I'm the lead prosecutor on the Richardson case." Evelyn welcomed them into her home, quickly adding 2 place settings to her dinner table. As they shared the simple meal of grilled salmon and local vegetables, Eleanor outlined what would come next. "Harrison's legal team is grasping at straws," she explained, accepting a glass of Oregon Pinot Noir. "The motion against you was dismissed. The judge saw it for what it was, a desperate attempt to create reasonable doubt." "And the sentencing?" Elena set down her glass carefully. "Given his age and health, he'll likely receive 10 to 12 years. With good behavior and continued health issues, he could be out in 6. The Rainier site families will receive compensation regardless," Catherine added. "The judge has ordered a significant portion of Richardson Properties' assets liquidated for that purpose." "What's left of the company?" Evelyn asked. "Not much," Elena replied. "The board voted to dissolve the corporation last week. Too much toxic association with the Richardson name." After dinner, as they sat on the deck watching the sunset paint the ocean in shades of amber and gold, Catherine broached the subject they had been dancing around. "Laurel Davis had her baby," she said, showing Evelyn a photo on her phone. "A boy. She named him Mark, after the father." The image showed a tired but smiling Laurel, holding a newborn with a shock of dark hair. Nothing in the child's features suggested any connection to Harrison. "She's moved back to Minneapolis permanently," Catherine continued. "The trust fund you established will ensure the child's education, but she's determined to make her own way otherwise." "Good for her," Evelyn said sincerely. Despite everything, she had never viewed Laurel as the villain in this story, just another player in Harrison's manipulative games. "She asked me to give you this." Catherine handed Evelyn a sealed envelope. Inside was a brief note in Laurel's precise handwriting. "Evelyn, I owe you an apology that words can't adequately express. I believed Harrison's promises, his vision of a future together, but I also knew he was married. I chose to ignore that reality to rationalize it away. In doing so, I became complicit in causing you pain. The trust fund for Mark is more generosity than I deserve. I will ensure he grows up knowing that his education was secured by a woman who chose compassion over vengeance when she had every right to the latter. I hope you find the peace and happiness you deserve in your new life. With sincere gratitude and regret." Laurel Evelyn folded the note carefully, touched by its sincerity. "She'll be all right," she said, more to herself than to her guests. "She's young, resilient." "Unlike some," Catherine observed, her gaze steady on Evelyn. "The toll of all this hasn't been without cost for you." "No," Evelyn acknowledged, "but necessary costs in the end." Later that night, after her guests had departed for their hotel in Seaside, Evelyn sat alone on her deck. The moon cast a silver path across the dark water, a shimmering road to nowhere. She thought about Harrison, awaiting sentencing in a private room of the King County Medical Center, where he had been transferred after another cardiac episode following the verdict. The man she had married at 35, brilliant, ambitious, charismatic, bore little resemblance to the diminished figure who had sat at the defense table. His empire was in ruins, his reputation destroyed, his freedom soon to be forfeit. Even with the best medical care money could buy, his prognosis was uncertain. The doctors had been clear. The stress of imprisonment could trigger another, potentially fatal heart attack. A familiar ache bloomed in her chest, not love exactly, but the phantom pain of a connection severed after decades. Despite everything, Harrison Richardson had been her partner for 35 years. They had built a life together, shared triumphs and failures, created a daughter they both adored. Her phone chimed with a text from Rebecca. "Judge approved my visit tomorrow. Dad's asking for you too. Should I tell him you'll come?" Evelyn stared at the message, uncertain. Seeing Harrison now, after the verdict but before sentencing, would serve no practical purpose. The legal battles were essentially over. The divorce was final. Their lives had irrevocably diverged. Yet something pulled at her. A need for true closure, perhaps. Or maybe just the human instinct to witness the end of a story in which she had played such a central role. "Yes," she replied finally. "I'll meet you at the medical center at 11. The hospital room looked more like an upscale hotel suite, with muted colors and tasteful artwork on the walls. Security protocols had been relaxed given Harrison's medical condition, requiring only a sign-in at the nurse's station rather than the full visitor screening process typical for high-profile defendants. Rebecca was already there when Evelyn arrived, sitting beside the hospital bed where Harrison lay, connected to monitors that beeped with reassuring regularity. He looked smaller somehow. The bulk and presence that had always seemed so fundamental to his character, diminished by illness and defeat. "Mom," Rebecca stood, embracing Evelyn with obvious relief. "I wasn't sure you'd actually come." "Neither was I," Evelyn admitted quietly. Harrison's eyes opened at the sound of her voice. For a moment, confusion clouded his features, then recognition dawned. "Evelyn." His voice was rough, weaker than she remembered. "You came." "Yes." She approached the bed, maintaining a careful distance. Rebecca thought it might be important. Harrison attempted to sit up straighter, grimacing with the effort. Always the diplomat, even now. Rebecca glanced between her parents, clearly uncomfortable with the tension. "I'll give you two some privacy. I need coffee anyway." After she left, silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken recriminations and regrets. "You look well," Harrison finally said. "Oregon agrees with you." "It does." Evelyn remained standing, unwilling to settle into what could become a lengthy conversation. "Why did you want to see me, Harrison?" He looked away, focusing on the window where Seattle's skyline was partially visible through rain-streaked glass. "Sentencing is next week. My lawyers are still pushing for house arrest, but after the verdict..." He trailed off, the outcome obvious to both of them. "I'm sorry about your health," Evelyn said, and meant it. Truly. "Are you?" A flash of the old Harrison surfaced, cynical, challenging. "You set all this in motion, Evelyn, deliberately, methodically." I exposed the truth. There's a difference. A semantic one, perhaps. He adjusted the nasal cannula delivering oxygen, his movements betraying weakness. "But that's not why I asked you here." "Why then?" Harrison reached for the bedside table, retrieving an envelope similar to the one Laurel had sent. "My lawyers advised against this, but I wanted you to have it before sentencing." Evelyn hesitated before accepting it. "It's not a trick or a legal maneuver," he added, seeing her reluctance. "Just something I need you to know." Inside the envelope was a single sheet of paper containing a list of dates and brief descriptions spanning their entire marriage. October 12th, 1990. Evelyn's first book published. Proudest day of my life, watching her at the signing. July 4th, 2003. Vacation in Maine. E laughing on the dock at sunset. Perfect. December 25th, 2010. E found the perfect gift again. How does she always know? Entries continued. Page after page of small moments, private joys, shared experiences. The final entry was dated the night before her birthday party. "Tomorrow I destroy everything. Why can't I stop myself?" "What is this?" Evelyn asked, her voice unsteady. "My journal. Not the whole thing, just the parts about us, the real parts." Harrison's expression was difficult to read, part defiance, part vulnerability. "I want you to know that it wasn't all a lie. Not the beginning, not the good years." Evelyn stared at the pages in her hands, recognizing moments she had treasured, and thought Harrison had forgotten or never valued. "You never told me these things," she said finally. "All these years, these thoughts." "I know." He closed his eyes briefly. "I became someone else over time. Someone who saw vulnerability as weakness, sentiment as liability." His gaze met hers directly. "But I did love you, Evelyn. In my way." "Your way," she repeated softly. "That was always the problem, wasn't it? Your way demanded everything on your terms." "Yes." The simple admission seemed to cost him considerable effort. "I justified it all. The affairs, the business decisions, the lies. Told myself it was for our benefit, our future. But it was always about control, about winning." Evelyn folded the pages carefully, returning them to the envelope. "Why show me this now? What purpose does it serve?" "None, probably." Harrison attempted a smile that came across as a grimace. "Maybe I just wanted someone to know that I understand what I lost, what I threw away." They sat in silence for several minutes. the steady beep of the heart monitor marking time between them. Outside, Seattle's persistent rain streaked the windows, blurring the city beyond. "I won't be at the sentencing," Evelyn said finally. "I think it's better that way." Harrison nodded, accepting this boundary. "Rebecca said you've been using some of your settlement to fund scholarships for women returning to academia after caregiving breaks." "Yes, the Evelyn Wright Second Chances Foundation." She allowed herself a small smile. "Catherine is helping administer it." "It's a good use of the money," he said, surprising her. "Better than anything I would have done with it." A gentle knock at the door signaled Rebecca's return. She entered carrying a tray with 3 coffee cups, her expression hopeful. "I thought we might all want some coffee," she said, setting the tray on the side table. "Is everything okay in here?" "Yes," Evelyn said, accepting a cup. "We were just talking about the foundation." Rebecca's relief was palpable. "Mom's already funded 15 scholarships for the fall semester. Women in their 40s, 50s, even 60s, going back to complete degrees or start new ones. Like your mother might have done," Harrison observed, "if she hadn't devoted those years to supporting me instead." The acknowledgement, so simple, yet so profound, hung in the air between them. Rebecca glanced at Evelyn, clearly surprised by her father's insight. "It's not too late," Evelyn said quietly. "For them or for me?" "You're going back to teaching?" Harrison asked. "Not yet. But I've been writing again. Literary analysis. A small press in Portland is interested in publishing a collection of essays." "She's being modest," Rebecca interjected. "The editor called it groundbreaking and long overdue. They're talking about a book tour next spring." Harrison's expression softened, something like genuine pride flickering across his features. "You always were the truly gifted one between us, Evelyn. I just had the louder voice." The admission, so contrary to the dynamic that had defined their marriage, left Evelyn momentarily speechless. Before she could respond, a nurse entered to check Harrison's vital signs and administer medication. "I should go," Evelyn said, rising. "The drive back to Cannon Beach is long and there's rain forecasted." Harrison caught her hand as she turned to leave, the first physical contact between them since the divorce. "Thank you for coming. I didn't deserve it." "No," she agreed gently, "but Rebecca did, and I needed it too in ways I didn't expect." "Mom, wait," Rebecca called, following her into the hallway. "That seemed different. What did he say to you?" Evelyn patted the envelope in her purse. "He gave me a glimpse of a man I thought I knew once, a man who might have existed in moments beneath all the ambition and manipulation." "Is that good?" "It's complicated." Evelyn embraced her daughter tightly. "But it helps somehow, to know that not everything was calculation, that some memories can remain untarnished." 2 weeks later, the sentencing made national headlines. Harrison Richardson, once among Seattle's most influential businessmen, sentenced to 12 years in federal prison for fraud, bribery, and environmental crimes. Due to his medical condition, he would serve his term in a minimum security facility with specialized healthcare capabilities. Evelyn watched the news coverage from her beach house, a glass of wine in hand and Catherine on speakerphone. "The Rainier site families are satisfied," Catherine reported. "The settlement will cover relocation costs, ongoing medical monitoring, and compensation for diminished property values." "And the site itself?" "Remediation begins next month. It will take years, but eventually the land will be clean enough for a public park." Catherine's voice softened. "You did that, Evelyn. Without your evidence, without your courage, none of this would have happened." After the call ended, Evelyn walked along the beach as twilight descended, the day's heat giving way to a cool breeze off the water. 6 months had passed since her birthday party. 6 months that had transformed her life in ways she was still discovering. The weight of Harrison's journal entries remained with her, not because they changed the reality of what he had done or justified his betrayals, but because they complicated the narrative she had constructed to make sense of their marriage. The truth, as always, resided somewhere in the messy middle, neither the romantic partnership she had once believed in, nor the purely transactional arrangement she had later condemned it as. 2 days after the sentencing, Rebecca had arrived at the beach house with unexpected news. She had accepted a position as executive director of a major environmental foundation in Portland. "It feels right," she had explained, helping Evelyn prepare dinner. "Using what I learned at the Richardson Foundation, but for an organization with genuine environmental commitment. And it's only 2 hours from here," Evelyn had observed with a smile. "That too." Rebecca had hesitated before continuing. "I saw Dad before they transferred him. He asked me to give you something." The something had been a legal document transferring ownership of a small property in the San Juan Islands to Evelyn, a waterfront cottage they had purchased in the early years of their marriage. Unlike their other real estate holdings, this one had remained separate from Richardson Properties, owned personally and used as a private retreat. Enclosed with the deed was a brief note. "This was always yours in spirit. Now it's yours, in fact. The only place we were ever truly equal partners." Evelyn had visited the cottage once since receiving the deed, a day trip with Rebecca to assess its condition and decide whether to keep or sell it. Standing on the familiar porch overlooking the Sound, memories had washed over her like the tide. Weekends sailing with Rebecca, evenings reading by the stone fireplace, mornings waking to the call of gulls. "We were happy here," Rebecca had said, echoing Evelyn's thoughts. "All of us." "Yes," Evelyn had agreed. "Perhaps that's why I can't bring myself to sell it yet." Now, walking along the Oregon coast as stars began to appear above the darkening ocean, Evelyn reflected on the complex legacy of her marriage to Harrison. For 35 years, she had defined herself primarily as his wife, allowing her own ambitions and identity to recede into the background of their shared life. The betrayal that had finally severed that bond had been painful, humiliating, but also ultimately liberating. In its aftermath, she had discovered strengths she had forgotten she possessed: resilience, independence, purpose beyond the reflecting glory of her husband's success. At 60, Evelyn Wright was becoming the woman she might have been all along had circumstances been different, the author whose first book had shown such promise, the professor whose students had once found inspiration in her insights, the individual whose worth derived from her own accomplishments, not her proximity to power. There was loss in that transformation, certainly. The security of a defined role, the comfort of familiar patterns, even destructive ones, the carefully constructed identity of Evelyn Richardson, perfect corporate wife. But there was gain as well, immeasurable, profound, freedom to choose her own path, space to rediscover dormant passions, relationships based on mutual respect rather than power dynamics. As darkness settled over the beach, Evelyn turned back toward the warm lights of her home. In the distance, she could see a figure on her deck. Rebecca arrived earlier than expected for their weekend together. Beyond her, the ocean stretched infinite and ever-changing, its constant rhythm a reminder that transformation, while often painful, was the natural order of life. The revenge she had taken against Harrison, if it could be called that, had exacted a cost from her as well. The months of planning, the energy diverted to documentation and legal maneuvers, the emotional toll of dismantling a life shared for decades. Even in victory, there was a bittersweet recognition of what had been lost. Yet as she approached her beach house, Evelyn felt no regret. The path she had chosen had been necessary, not just for justice, but for her own reclamation of self. The woman who climbed the steps to embrace her daughter bore little resemblance to the one who had stood frozen at her birthday party 6 months earlier, watching her world collapse around her. That woman had been defined by her relationship to Harrison. This one, stronger, clearer, more authentic, was defined by her relationship to herself. "I opened the wine," Rebecca called as Evelyn approached. "That Oregon Pinot you love." "Perfect," Evelyn replied, joining her daughter on the deck. "Let's watch the stars come out." Together they settled into comfortable silence, two women at different stages of their journeys, connected by blood and experience and mutual respect. Below them, waves continued their eternal conversation with the shore, advancing, retreating, reshaping. Nature's reminder that change, while often turbulent, was the only constant. Evelyn raised her glass in a silent toast, not to the past with its complications and contradictions, but to the future with its untapped possibilities. At 60, she had learned what had eluded her for decades, that dignity wasn't found in reflected glory or social standing, but in standing firmly in one's own truth, whatever the cost, whatever the consequence. The night sky opened above them, stars emerging in familiar patterns against the darkness. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new discoveries. For now, though, this moment was enough. This peace hard won, this freedom long deserved, this second chance at becoming herself. 5 years later, the bookstore buzzed with anticipation as attendees filled every available seat. Staff hurriedly added extra chairs along the walls to accommodate the overflow crowd. At the podium stood Evelyn Wright, now 65, her silver hair elegantly swept into a loose chignon, reading glasses perched on her nose as she prepared her notes. "Professor Wright will take questions after the reading," announced the bookstore owner, a woman in her 30s with vibrant blue hair. "But please hold your applause until she's finished the selected passage from her award-winning memoir, The Age of Dignity." In the front row, Rebecca sat beside her partner, Daniel, an environmental lawyer she had met through her foundation work. At 35, Rebecca had her mother's composure and her father's strategic mind, though she had learned to use the latter in service of causes larger than herself. Her hand rested protectively over her slightly rounded belly, 5 months pregnant with their first child. Evelyn looked up from her notes, surveying the crowd with quiet confidence. Gone was the careful restraint that had characterized her public appearances as Harrison Richardson's wife. This Evelyn commanded the room naturally, her presence authentic rather than performative. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice clear and strong. "This particular passage speaks to the moment I realized that transformation doesn't end with crisis. It begins there." She opened the book, its cover featuring a simple image of a woman standing at the edge of the ocean, facing the horizon. "On my 63rd birthday," she read, "I returned to Seattle for the first time in nearly 3 years. The city had changed, as cities do, but the most profound changes were inside me. Walking past buildings that bore the Richardson name, I felt neither bitterness nor nostalgia, only a curious detachment, as if viewing artifacts from someone else's life. That afternoon I visited Harrison at the Federal Medical Center. His third heart attack had left him diminished. His legendary charisma faded to a ghost of its former power. Yet in his weakened state, he had found something that had eluded him at the height of his success: perspective. I had everything, he told me, and understood nothing. We spoke of Rebecca, of her work, of the grandchild on the way. We spoke of my books, my teaching, my travels. We did not speak of the past. That territory had been exhausted between us, mapped and remapped until its landmarks held no more surprises. As I prepared to leave, Harrison asked if I had found happiness. The question struck me as both profound and inadequate. Happiness, I had learned, was too small a container for what I had discovered in the years since our separation. What I had found was something at once simpler and more complex. Authenticity. I told him I had found myself. He nodded, understanding more than I expected. "That," he said, "is the one thing I never gave you enough space to do." It was perhaps the most honest exchange we had ever shared. Not a reconciliation, our paths had diverged too completely for that, but an acknowledgement, a recognition that beyond the betrayals and legal battles, beyond the public scandal and private pain, we had once been two people who chose each other. However imperfectly, we had honored that choice. Driving away from the facility, I realized that forgiveness isn't about excusing harmful actions or inviting their repetition. It's about refusing to allow past injuries to determine present peace. In releasing Harrison from the grip of my anger, I freed myself from the last chains binding me to our shared history. The woman who had once defined herself as Harrison Richardson's wife had finally, completely disappeared. In her place stood someone both familiar and new, a woman who had weathered storms of her own creation and emerged with unexpected treasures salvaged from the wreckage. Evelyn closed the book, her gaze meeting Rebecca's briefly before addressing the audience again. That visit was the last time I saw Harrison. He died 3 months later, peacefully in his sleep, according to the official report. At his request, there was no funeral, only a small private memorial attended by Rebecca and a handful of others whose loyalty had survived his downfall. A respectful silence held the room, broken finally by applause that built from tentative to enthusiastic. As the bookstore owner returned to the podium to moderate questions, Evelyn settled into her chair, feeling the familiar mix of vulnerability and strength that accompanied sharing her story publicly. Later, after the last book had been signed and the final well-wisher had departed, Evelyn joined Rebecca and Daniel at a nearby cafe. The April evening was mild, cherry blossoms drifting occasionally onto their outdoor table. "You've gotten better at the public speaking part," Rebecca observed, stirring her decaf tea. "The first tour, you looked like you wanted to hide behind the podium." Evelyn laughed. "I did. 35 years of standing in the background, made the spotlight feel like an interrogation lamp. She reached across the table to squeeze her daughter's hand. "How are you feeling? The little one letting you sleep?" "Not much." But Daniel picks up the slack. Rebecca smiled at her partner. "He's already reading developmental psychology books to prepare." "One of us should know what we're doing," Daniel replied with good-natured self-deprecation. Their easy rapport warmed Evelyn. After the tumultuous Richardson divorce and Harrison's subsequent conviction, Rebecca had struggled to trust romantic relationships. Meeting Daniel, straightforward, ethically grounded, genuinely supportive, had helped her heal that particular wound. "Have you decided on a name?" Evelyn asked. Rebecca hesitated. "Actually, if it's a girl, we're thinking of Evelyn. Eve, for short." Unexpected emotion tightened Evelyn's throat. "I would be honored," she managed finally. "And if it's a boy," Daniel added. "Thomas, after my grandfather." "Not Harrison?" Evelyn asked gently. Rebecca shook her head. "Dad's legacy is complicated enough without putting that burden on a child." She paused, collecting her thoughts. "I've made my peace with who he was, the good and the bad. I visit his grave when I'm in Seattle, but his name belongs to the past." Evelyn nodded, understanding completely. In the years since Harrison's death, they had each found their own way to reconcile the man they had known with the damage he had caused. As the conversation shifted to Evelyn's upcoming teaching position at Reed College, a one-year visiting professorship in literature and gender studies, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. At 65, she lived primarily in her Cannon Beach home, though she maintained the San Juan cottage as a summer retreat. The Second Chances Foundation had expanded to support women nationwide, with particular focus on those reclaiming interrupted education or careers after long pauses. Her writing, first academic articles, then a memoir, now a collection of essays, had earned critical acclaim and a devoted following. Most importantly, she had built a life that reflected her values rather than someone else's expectations. Her relationships, her work, her daily choices all emerged from an internal compass that had been recalibrated through hardship and healing. After dinner, they walked together along the Portland waterfront, the city lights reflecting in the Willamette River. Rebecca and Daniel walked slightly ahead, his arm protectively around her shoulders, their conversation punctuated by occasional laughter. Evelyn watched them, struck by how differently Rebecca's relationship had unfolded compared to her own marriage. Where Evelyn had diminished herself to accommodate Harrison's expansive ego, Rebecca and Daniel grew alongside each other, separate individuals choosing shared direction rather than one subsuming the other. "Mom?" Rebecca had stopped, waiting for her to catch up. "You got quiet. Everything okay?" "More than okay," Evelyn replied, joining them. "Just thinking about circles and lines." "Is this one of your professor metaphors?" Rebecca asked with affectionate teasing. "Perhaps," Evelyn smiled. "I was thinking how life isn't linear like we're taught to believe, a straight path from youth to age, from ignorance to wisdom. It's circular, bringing us back to lessons we thought we'd learned, opportunities we thought we'd missed, versions of ourselves we thought were lost." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "Like how you returned to academia in your 60s. "Exactly. The young professor I was at 30 became submerged beneath layers of Mrs. Richardson, but she wasn't gone, just waiting for the right conditions to re-emerge." They continued walking, the spring evening wrapping around them like a gentle embrace. Behind them, the bookstore where Evelyn had shared her story was still illuminated, its window display featuring her memoir prominently. "What's next after the Reed position?" Rebecca asked. "Another book. I'm not sure," Evelyn admitted. "For the first time in my life, I'm comfortable with uncertainty, with letting the next chapter reveal itself in its own time." This, perhaps, was the most profound change since her divorce from Harrison. The need to control outcomes, to plan meticulously for every contingency, habits learned during decades of navigating her husband's volatile ambitions, had gradually released their hold on her. In their place had grown a capacity for presence, for trusting her own resilience regardless of what came next. As they reached Rebecca's apartment building, Evelyn embraced her daughter, feeling the slight swell of her pregnancy between them, the next generation already benefiting from hard-won wisdom. "I'll see you for lunch tomorrow before my flight," Evelyn said, kissing Rebecca's cheek. "Love you, Mum. Tonight was perfect." After saying goodnight to Daniel, Evelyn walked alone to her hotel, enjoying the solitude. 5 years ago, the prospect of navigating a strange city by herself at night would have filled her with anxiety. Now it felt like freedom, one of many small liberties she had reclaimed. In her hotel room, she opened the balcony door to let in the night air and the distant sounds of the city. On the desk lay a copy of her memoir along with notes for tomorrow's final interview before returning to the coast. Beside them, a framed photograph of her beach house, waves crashing against the shore in the foreground. Evelyn picked up the photo, remembering the day Rebecca had taken it, how the light had been perfect, the sky clear after days of rain, the world washed clean and gleaming with possibility. That image, more than any other, represented what she had discovered in the aftermath of betrayal and renewal, that endings, however painful, create space for beginnings. That identity, far from being fixed, remains fluid throughout life, capable of evolution, resilience, and redefinition at any age. At 65, Evelyn Wright had become not just the author of books, but the author of her own life. The painful chapter of Harrison's betrayal had been necessary to the storyline, but it was no longer the defining plot point. It was simply one event in a narrative that continued to unfold in unexpected and rewarding ways. Standing on the balcony, looking out at Portland's nighttime panorama, Evelyn felt a profound gratitude for the journey that had brought her here, not despite its difficulties, but because of them. The woman who had once believed her worth derived from her husband's status now understood a deeper truth. Dignity comes not from external validation, but from internal alignment, from living authentically according to one's own values, regardless of age or circumstance. The night sky opened above her, stars emerging in familiar patterns against the darkness. Tomorrow would bring new readers, new students, new experiences. For now, though, this moment was enough. This peace hard won, this freedom long deserved, this life finally and completely her own. If this story touched your heart and you want to keep following inspiring and moving stories, be sure to check out our upcoming videos, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications to stay updated on new content that can brighten your journey and provide valuable insights. Join us and keep exploring stories that truly matter. I'm sure the next video that pops up on your screen will touch you as well, so click on it now, and we'll see you there.